Hello, everyone. Just a quick A/B check. Can you hear me? Hands. Great. Thank you, sir, in the back. Thank you, everyone, for joining me for this talk. I know that we're in competition with lunch, and that is a tall, competitive level to get over, so thank you for joining us. My name is Brian Renero. I'm a product manager here at Sumo Logic. I've been with Sumo Logic for about a year now. And actually this particular feature, this particular product is near and dear to my heart because this was the first feature that I managed here at Sumo Logic. And what's interesting about it is that as we developed this feature, I learned a lot about how people use Sumo Logic within their enterprise and some of the particular challenges that they have as they increase the usage of Sumo Logic within a growing set of teams. Now, during the course of development of ingest budgets, we got a lot of feedback from individuals and people that currently use Sumo Logic, and some interesting patterns popped up. What we find is that when people start expanding their use of ingest budgets across their enterprise, typically there's a team, a set of individuals who are administrating the account. And they themselves may not necessarily, they may have additional duties and jobs beyond just managing the Sumo Logic account. They have other tasks that they need to perform. But as their organization has evolved, these individuals have become kind of the de facto administrator of the account, and they're the people that everyone else in their organization depends on to get set up with collection and log ingestion. But the problem that they face is that the teams that they're integrating or providing this administration for, as the team grows, as the overall organization grows, they themselves may not be in direct contact or day-to-day contact with the teams that are going to be using Sumo Logic. So they have a need to manage these remote teams, some people that they may not know necessarily personally, and assure that certain things are happening with their ingest. They need to be able to have these teams send logs into Sumo Logic but control the costs in a predictable manner, right? They need to protect themselves against these unexpected spikes that occur when maybe a team is getting new to Sumo Logic, adding in logs, and then suddenly there's a burst of ingest that comes in through the system and drives up some of the costs on our side. And of course, as they're onboarding new workloads and data loads into Sumo Logic, there's a need within these teams to have monitoring or baselining the kinds of log load that's coming into the system. So we took a deep look at these requests and developed ingest budgets to meet these requirements. Let me show you how this actually works based on some of the direct feedback that we've gotten from a customer that we were working with as an early design partner on ingest budgets. Now, for this particular customer, they've divided their collection system much the same way that you may also be arranging your system as well. You have at the top a set of pre-production servers and a set of collectors that draw data from applications that may be running in your test instances and certainly in your development instances and also in some of your staging instances. Now you want to draw logs from these systems because they're important. You may be baselining the performance of your application. You may certainly be debugging the application before it goes to production or as it's being prepared for GA release. But this is not necessarily intended to be a high volume of logs, and certainly it's not yet business critical. Then you have a second class of application servers that are associated to your production traffic. And for that set of applications and the associated collectors that you have with them, that is business critical data. That's stuff that needs to keep flowing into the system because you're making business critical decisions in a timely manner based on that data. But what happens often in this particular case for this customer that I was working with, they have a problem that something unexpected happens in this pre-production set of application servers. Most notably for them, the case that they were trying to prevent from happening is the development team was working on a new application. The application itself was a client of a back-end database system, And what happened is that the developers were preparing to go on vacation for a long weekend. So they shut off the back-end database. But they left the application servers running. And during that time, the application servers in this development instance, they're trying to reconnect back to the database. So their logs start getting filled up with DB connection exception logs over and over and over again. And that kind of drove their ingestion up beyond what they had budgeted for this. And actually in this particular case, because it was a long weekend, it pushed them beyond what their quota had been set out for this contract, and now they're in overages. And that's definitely not such a great situation. Now, and this poor developers at the end of that weekend, when they come back on the Tuesday following the long weekend to find that they've driven these costs up, are suffering the ignominy of going over budget in this way. Sumo Logic, as you saw in today's introduction keynote, a major value for us is to be in it with our customers. And so we want to be able to provide tooling that keeps the costs under control. And that's exactly what ingest budgets are for. We're a partner with you in your success. So we wanted to provide a tool that allows these administrators to expand the usage of Sumo Logic and collect more logs across their enterprise and among these teams that they may not be having day-to-day conversations with. They need to be able to enable these teams to set up collection, but they also need to do so with confidence, that as they expand the usage, they're able to keep things under control and observable. And that's what ingest budgets does. So let's replay that scenario again and see what would happen once we have ingest budgets set up. So in this particular case, we're going to declare a budget, and we're going to associate it to this pre-production cluster. We can even name the budget dev. Maybe my application is my catalog application or my user login. So I would name this collector with this budget with something that was descriptive that I understand. So it would be catalog app dev. And then I associate all of the collectors that handle that workload to this budget. And I assign it with a limit, a capacity for the budget. And in this case, it's going to be 20 gig. This is over a 24-hour period. So my expectation is that normal log ingest for my development or pre-production cluster should be 20 gigs per day, right? Now, if for whatever reason I'm running a performance test, or maybe I shut off the database and forget to turn off the application servers. If that burst were to occur again at the application server side, once I pass that 20 gig budget limit, I just shut off collection at the collectors so that logs are no longer coming into the system, and I'm protected against that scenario. Everybody's happy. But as you might also expect, one thing I often want to remind our customers about too is that they often think of ingest budgets as stopping logs, stopping the log ingestion coming into Sumo Logic, and that's useful for this particular case. But it's also important for some customers that they're immediately going to see as ingest budgets as only useful for non-critical business data or data that has nothing to do with a production cluster. And it's a non-starter for them to just stop collecting logs. In case in point, one particular customer, their challenge was sometimes the log level on their production cluster may be set to a debug mode, more verbose mode, and they're getting interleaved debug logs with their production logs. So just shutting off the influx of logs wouldn't be possible for them. They can't do that. They need that data. So there's a second capability within ingest budgets, another configuration that you can set, and that's called audit-only mode. Now the use here is that you can define a limit, which you define as normal ingest, just as you would with the stop collection mode. But the difference here is that you get alerts, you can set up alerts on your system to be informed when you go over this expected normal amount of ingest. Logs keep flowing in, so you don't lose any data. It still comes into the system, but again, it's one of these systems that give you the visibility and the capacity to respond to these situations so that you can go take care of it on the server and stay within controls and budgets without losing important data. And then, of course, the situation, you go from the ignominy and shame of problematic ingest to the hero that saves the day. So since ingest budgets is based on this idea of setting a threshold, One of the additional features of ingest budgets is that we have what's called the audit threshold. This is the threshold. It becomes at a level lower than the capacity of the budget. And what happens is once the consumption goes over the threshold limit, we start sending events into our audit event index. Why do we do that? It's because you can then query that audit index to see if you've gone over budget for any particular set of collectors. But you can also set alerts on that and be informed. And the key to that is being informed either before the ingest stops altogether, or getting an early information so that you can go take care of it on the servers immediately. You can address these situations. So in the cases that you set this ingest limit, as you see at the top in the red line, that's the hard cap for the ingest limit. And then we have the audit threshold, which by default is set at 85% of the total capacity of the budget. But different workloads require different limits. So we've enabled you to set your audit threshold at a custom level so that you get more time to respond to this overage. So you get the alert, you get the notification, you can go take action and get your budget back under control without, again, with the goal of keeping your costs under control without losing log data and precious actionable data from your logs. Setting up ingest budgets, you can do it through the API if you like to orchestrate through the setup of your system through the back end. Of course, we also provide the configuration of ingest budgets from the UI. The major pieces of information here, is you can see from this particular demo or example, is I've set up my ingestion for 93 gig per day in this particular case. Further down on this panel, I also have a capacity to set the reset time. Now, as I had mentioned before, ingest budgets work on a 24-hour cycle. I prefer to keep things, for this example, at midnight GMT. I always like to think in terms of GMT. But it may be the case that you have to keep your budget working on a local business cycle, some time period that works for your particular location. So you're able to set your reset time for any hour of the day to any time zone of the planet. So again, a convenience for making sure that the budget cycle works on the same business cycles that you use. And then, of course, I've set up this budget, again, to illustrate this capacity that you're able to keep collecting once you've gone over the cap. You're using this in an alert mode rather than a stop collection mode. That's part of this. And then, of course, I can set my alert threshold. In this particular case, I'm using the default, which is, again, 85%. So once again, if my budget gets consumed, or if the ingest on these collectors goes out of whack for whatever reason, I'll start getting my notifications with a margin of 15% before I hit the cap. Plenty of time for me to go in and take action. And then finally, ingest budgets works on multiple collectors, so it's a one-to-many relationship. So I can manage several collectors that have duties for the same workload or data flow that's connected. So at the bottom, you can see the budgets that are, the collectors that are associated to the budget. So I can keep track of which collector is going to be affected. If I'm an admin, some of our customers use this information to identify the individual or team that's responsible for that collector. So when they get an alert, they go contact that team and say, hey, we've noticed that you're ingesting beyond the normal limits. You should take a look at your system and see if there's any abnormal, anomalous behavior, and that's what's the benefit of this. This is the view of the audit event index. Once the budgets pass through the threshold, we'll start logging events to this index, and this is the query that you would use to search on this. This is also the query that you would use to set up a saved search and an alert to get those notifications of budget overages. You can see the rate at which you're consuming your budget. And then, of course, another important detail about ingest budgets is we're talking about costs and the ingestion of logs. So this is actually critical data to you as an administrator to keep track of how your system is configured, how changes to costs can be incurred. So we've added the capacity for this, the state changes of the budgets, to be logged to our audit index, so you can monitor how your budgets have been configured and how they may change. So you always understand what was affecting your ingest at any time in the past. So the main things, basically, I want to have you take away from the talk is one is that we wanted to give you these capacities to control your costs, and that was really important for us. We want to make sure that, again, you have the confidence to use Sumo Logic, go big with it across your enterprise. And this is part of that partnership of we're in it with you. But the second part I want to make a special note of is, again, people kind of cognitively click on or associate themselves to the idea that this is stopping the ingestion of logs, which certainly you can do with ingest budgets, but it's also an important feature to be able to monitor your workloads and set limits that you get alerted on, even though you have no intention or can't stop the ingest. You still want to get alerted and notified and monitor and baseline these workloads. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is that you can control team costs. Again, you can declare up to 100 budgets per account. So different teams have different workloads. Different teams want to organize their ingest in different ways. So there's plenty of flexibility for you to control costs for these budget teams individually. Thanks very much for listening. We go do questions in just a second, but I wanted to also, as a product manager, I'm obsessed with feedback, so please do click on the QR code and give me your feedback for this particular talk. And then, of course, our VP of Strategy is going to be making a presentation following this. Any questions?
Hi, and thank you. You had noted database exception errors as they were off on their long weekend as an example of abnormal, anomalous behavior. What are some other examples of abnormal behavior?
Yeah, good question. And everybody heard that question. What are other examples that we've seen out there? In some cases, someone's left the log level, the debug level high. That's been one that we've seen quite a bit of. Other times there might be load testing that a team has performed. Again, the scenario that we've seen in this particular case is that the administrator wants to enable these individual development teams to send logs in, but they may not be themselves Sumo experts, so they'll start a test and they don't understand that all of this log is being flowing into Sumo. So they'll do a load test and not cordon off those logs that are generating that, and that kind of bursts it up. So that's one of the cases that we see out there as well. Oh, and one more case, that's another one, is we see a lot of customers that are trying to migrate or onboard new teams to get their data in, and they're trying to think, what should the budget be? I'm not exactly sure for this new load. We're just figuring it out. So they'll use ingest budgets to set alerts at different levels to understand what normal flow of log would be. So kind of a discovery of what your requirements are. Any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, hi, Brian with a Y.
Yeah, right on.
It's the only way to spell it.
Yeah, we're meeting afterwards.
Perfect. Yeah. So we have hundreds, maybe thousands of collectors, and if I want to set an ingest budget, just maybe across our QA environment, can you wildcard the collectors to target,
So that's going to be part of our, I'm glad that you asked this question. That's part of our continuing development. Right now, the way that you assign budgets is by collector. You take a group of collectors and you assign them to a budget, essentially. But right now we're working on assignment by metadata field, or specifically by source category. So you would be able to wild card the value of that source category. So that's going to give you a lot more flexibility about assigning budget to specific data flows or workloads rather than just by collectors. So that's what we're working on in the future. I think we have time for one more question. I saw a hand up over here.
So this question is sort of around, you say if you hit an audit at 85% or something, you can say you have the ability to go in and take action. Is the action entirely on the onus of the application and how that is sending its logs, or does Sumo have the ability to have cost management itself to say how much it's going to ingest? Like, where does that lie?
So that's an interesting question. Currently, it's you know your data better than anyone else, or to be more specific, the team that have set up the collector knows their data better than anyone else. So our first goal is to provide the visibility that they've gotten, the awareness, the alert that they're going in this non-normal ingest pattern, and then that you would alert the team and they would take action in the application. There has been a request from users to go to if the budget is exceeded, to go into a sampling rate that, let's say, modulus 10 or something like that. Every 10th log line would come in and we would collect that. We can explore some other rules about that. It's about positively identifying those logs that you do want to come through and others which don't. To a large extent, the work that we're doing for metadata tagging, if you've properly tagged up your logs coming in, and then you can associate a budget rule based on those tags, you should be able to cover, that'll give you flexibility to cover that case about, the flow has gone over, but I'd like you to budget this set of logs more severely or more constrained, and allow the flow of this other set of logs that are categorized differently through. But it would be a little bit, I'd like to follow up offline on that with you, actually, because again, we would need to give you the right tools that you can say that these logs are the ones that should be coming through and these are the ones that should not. Metadata tagging should do that for you, but I'd like to hear a little bit more about the case that you have in mind. Cool. Thank you very much, everyone.